An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello and welcome to Steph Therapy 911 with Stephanie Samuels. And today I'm honored to have retired Assistant Chief Sarah Creighton with me. And Sarah and I found a piece of paper from the first time we met. So I have the official date of our meeting, which was right here. So we met at the International Association of Chiefs of Police. There is a symposium that they had put together with the Department of Justice for Breaking the Silence, a national symposium on law enforcement suicide. And they kind of invited what I guess would appear to be the who's who, at least whoever they could grab from the who's who. and kind of not only put us all together, but then broke us up into different categories. And so Sarah and I went into having never met each other, went into a training category, and I never let her go after that. So Sarah was just one of the most knowledgeable, passionate women that I had come across, and was part of San Diego Police Department. There's over 4,000 sworn officers, and she really had her pulse on what was going on. And I was at the time building what was then known as Copline, but we had not trained anybody nationally. And so anytime I needed information, what have you, I called up Sarah. So the backstory, which I do think has to be told, is in January of 2017, I had gone out there. So Sarah and I had been in contact for an extended period of time. Sarah, I guess, can you close those blinds? Because I guess those lines are, or no?
Yeah, okay. Isolate them.
Yeah, we'll tell you which ones. This was doing that. There we go.
No, yes?
No, it's going to be the one right behind you, probably.
That was the one.
So if not, people are just going to have to understand.
I'll change my orientation.
Oh, there you go.
That.
Hang on.
Better?
I think so.
Okay, and I'll move. The sun is going down here soon, so if I have to move, I'll do that.
So, of course, you're in beautiful California. We've been freezing back east.
Yeah, wildfire country.
So Sarah's just one of those shakers and movers. So I had been in contact, and then Sarah said that she loved the idea of Copline, but beyond that, she finally called me up and she said, "Listen, I'm retiring in February." Is it February of 2017? Yep. So we need to hold the first training for Copline. We've got to do this. I want to be part of it, which was probably my first true oh shit moment, that this was going to go from a dream, a needs to be done, to a reality. So I don't think so. I flew out to San Diego, went into Sarah's office. Sarah got me, went to the PD, beautiful corner office. I think it's corner office. And And I don't think I had sat down when you said we need to pick a date. Had I sat down?
I don't know.
Hmm.
You never sit down, so probably not.
Yeah. So there I was. And now I'm texting our lead trainer, Jay Nagdeman, saying, I need dates. I'm the assistant chief of San Diego's office. I need dates. And Sarah absolutely took over. When you talk about somewhat, and I probably didn't look like I was paralyzed with fear, but it was pretty clear that I was going to need a lot of help. And Sarah did what Sarah does best. Sarah came in, assessed the needs, figured out how to plug holes. And Sarah was in the first class of Copline, has been with us ever since, and is just such a huge advocate. And it's just one of those things that, you know, we have spoken about. It's just pure. You know, it was supposed to be a hotline for active officers, retired officers, and their families, answered by well-trained, vetted, retired officers. And that's exactly what it is. So it's nice when you can sink your teeth into something and it is what it is. And so I have, for those that have seen the movie Grease, actually for those that haven't, I can't imagine that they're watching, but I think everybody has. I've always said that she is, I am Kanicki and she is my second. She is, she's Danny. That should anything have happened to me while Copline was truly breathing life, that Sarah was going to have to take over for me. So anyway, it is an honor. It is an honor to have Sarah here. Sarah has created and has been just a huge, huge advocate for mental health, but she has one of the largest and most successful peer support wellness programs in the country. She is called upon on a regular basis, both when it was being started and while she was still active in the police department, and still now, on kind of how do you do this, you know, what works, what doesn't work. So I wanted to have Sarah on to talk about kind of how you get the buy-in, how you have a successful peer support program, and what that looks like. So thank you, Sarah.
You're very welcome.
So kind of take me, you get hired, what year?
1984.
Why a cop?
Because I was in my last semester of college to be an elementary school teacher, and it didn't feel right. And I happened upon a recruiting booth for CHP, California Highway Patrol, and thought it was interesting. And when I went home and shared with my family, my mother and my brother, they said, it's not for you. You're not cut out for it. And that made it more interesting. And so I ultimately ended up going on a ride along with somebody who I worked my entire career with. And after the ride along in the middle of the night with all the crazy people, I fell in love and knew it was exactly what I was meant to do. Got hired, started immediately after college, and can't see myself having done anything differently.
You had shared with me, and you have said that, you know, anything, we can talk about anything, which is just so typical you. Your background was tough, very tough.
Yes.
You came on the job resilient. You came on the job as truly a survivor and somebody that could hold her own no matter what. Looking back, would you have changed the past at all? And if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing what you want to about kind of growing up.
I wouldn't change the past. I think we are a product of everything that we experience, and we choose to survive it and thrive through it, or to be a victim of it. I grew up with a single mother who was physically and mentally ill, who really didn't have the capacity to take care of myself, my older brother and sister, and we really had to fend for ourselves. And I took on the role very early, who knows why, of being sort of the fixer, the problem solver. I was the youngest, but my role had always been, it's funny that I ultimately ended up retiring at a high level in a police organization. I was the incident commander in all things. If things weren't peaceful at home and mom was sort of off the rails, it was my responsibility to try and fix it. And I was blessed with skills to be able to sort of calm things down for whatever reason. But ultimately, that was the beginning of my growth and positioning me for where I would land in my career. But it was a hard upbringing. You don't know it while you're in it, though. You just don't, because it's all you know. But I am so grateful for it. And as I look back, I feel bad for my mother, for the challenges she had, her lack of ability to connect the necessity for self-care. And of course, that helps even more to see somebody suffering with so many things who really didn't know where to go, and drives the passion for wanting to help other people who are suffering.
So you get on the job. How soon did you, what was available when you came on the job as far as mental health, and what was, the stigma certainly still remains, you've impacted that. What was it like back then? And being a female, was it more difficult or easier to ask for help? Would there have been a perception back then that you had to hold your own because you were a female? There's more of a sign of weakness, kind of.
So let me address that issue first about being a female. I was blessed to pick San Diego PD, or for them to pick me. San Diego PD is a very progressive, has always been, organization that is ahead in a lot of things. And if I was ever treated differently because I was female at any point in my career, I was either too oblivious to know, or I just don't think that it happened. I think so much about, for me and my experience in my organization, it wasn't about being female, it was about who you were as a person that brought attention, negative or positive. It's not about gender. It wasn't. With that said, I recognize that's not everybody's experience. That doesn't happen in other organizations. I attribute that to really good leadership and to some really wonderful, we'll say, men predominantly, who just wouldn't allow that to interfere with anybody who had their intentions in the right place to do a good job, and not use their femininity to try and get ahead. And that was my experience. And again, I recognize not everybody gets the benefit of that experience as a female in law enforcement, but I was very blessed that that was not an issue for me. With regard to actually your first question about what was the environment around wellness, there were resources available. San Diego, again, pretty progressive in having psychological services. I believe we had peer support. I don't know what it looked like exactly. We had chaplains too, but in a very limited capacity. That changed even before we formalized our wellness unit in San Diego PD, and they became a lot more available. The problem for San Diego PD was not about the resources available, but marketing them, ensuring that people were utilizing them, understood them and what they could do, and the emphasis on this being, if you will, a performance game. And I hate to call it a game, that's trite, but you need to look at psychological services or any services about the soul from the perspective of, you need to stay at your best. You need to be in your best form, rather than availing any of those services because there's some sort of a deficit or a weakness. And so while those resources may have been available, I didn't use them very often. My go-to was what we did traditionally in the late 80s, and that was after work, let's go drink. And it was an informal debrief that was completely ineffective over alcohol, not much encouragement, a lot of humor. And that still exists. Some of that is good in small doses, but the reality was it wasn't very therapeutic, and oftentimes it just built onto the emotional load that was already pretty overwhelming.
Fair, very fair. So how'd you end up getting involved in the wellness program, and kind of what did it look like when you started getting involved?
Well, so that's an interesting story. I don't know exactly how it happened, except to say that all things are providential. Things start happening in your life that shape and prepare you for where you're going to land. And so, funny story, I had a fascination with hypnosis. And I used to go to stage hypnosis shows, and I decided I wanted a party trick. I mean, that's the reality of it all. So I went and tried to find a place where I could learn how to do hypnosis. And as it turns out, the only place you can do that is in a training facility that specifically does that with certification hypnotherapy, where you have to do an internship with real life people. And it's not for the benefit of a stage show or making people cluck like a chicken. It's about making significant changes. So I invested about a year of my life, weekends and evenings, in getting certified in hypnotherapy. And I have never made anybody cluck like a chicken or done anything that is other than therapeutic. But I did that, and I started working with coworkers unofficially, not part of the department resources, and saw the tremendous benefit to things like test taking for promotions, qualification shoots, which surprisingly freak a lot of officers out, and areas where they could enhance their performance and not be in their own way to get what they wanted. And so I saw a tremendous benefit in that, but that was just a certification program. And it didn't feel like it was enough. It had enough credibility behind it. So I went back and got my master's degree in human behavior to lend some credibility to that. And just out of a fascination about human behavior, and went along promoting at every juncture that I could. I'd like to say that it's because I thought I was going to be a wonderful leader. It was more about who I didn't want to have to work for if I didn't promote and they did. That's the reality in a lot of police departments. But I ended up being a pretty decent leader. And it was, I think, according to what people tell me, because I put others first. And people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that was sort of my responsibility as a leader, is to really care for people. So it lent greatly to my reputation and people wanting to work for me in the most fun or the least fun assignments. And so I had a bit of a following because I showed that I cared for people. The wellness unit came around essentially because we were going through some significant tragedy. We had a chief who had been an outsider who came into our department who had a different philosophy about discipline, about wellness, about a lot of things that took us back a little bit. No disrespect to him, he came from where he came from. What happened as a result of his leadership, or maybe lack thereof, is that we had a lot of issues with ineffective coping that resulted in officers being arrested, sexual assault, some theft, DUIs, domestic violence. We had 2 different spates over a period of about 2 years where officers were getting arrested and we were all over the national news. He brought in the command staff. This was when I was a captain, and that included captains and all the assistant chiefs, and had each one of us tell him what we thought our assessment was of what was going on in the organization, and what we thought the answer was. And so I proposed in one of those meetings that the ineffective coping was as a result of the lack of care we were providing our employees, and that we needed to do a better job about encouraging resource utilization, providing consistent training, and really showing a level of care for our employees. And I recommended, based on some stuff that I had read, just briefly, San Francisco's behavioral science unit. There were a couple of other places that had something in place that we consider putting something together in our department that was more formalized, that had basically served as an umbrella over all of our resources, and that it be placed at the highest level that we possibly can, and somehow on our organizational chart to show the level of importance. He and I didn't get along all that well, to be honest. We had very different philosophies about a lot of things. So he came back the next week and said, this is what we're going to do. He said exactly what I said, and said, and I'm looking to see if anybody's interested in doing that job. And instead of asking me. So I had to audition for the job that I essentially envisioned and created, and that was fine. It's part of the dance. And that was okay. I ultimately did, and we created a wellness unit. And initially, when we had put that together, we were in an office that was about a block and a half away from police headquarters. And we would talk to anybody about any issues that they had, try to align the resources. We formalized our training for our chaplains, our peer support, the psychologists, and everybody, so that we all spoke the same language, so that every resource that we had within our department understood the what each other could offer. What are the limitations and what are the capabilities of all the resources? Because somebody may not come see you as a psychologist. Right. They might be more comfortable seeing a chaplain, but we all have to speak the same language. We all have to have the same message and the same understanding about what needs to happen when something comes up that gets in the way of somebody's life. So we did that. And after about a year of being offsite, I told the chief that I thought we needed to move into headquarters, that we were further stigmatizing individuals who were coming to us. If they did come, we mostly went to them, by having it be offsite, and that we needed to create sort of a living room environment where people could walk in just like they would if they needed to get a flashlight battery, make changes on their tax deductions in the payroll office, but that there needed to be a place where somebody could take a load off, sit down, catch their breath, and talk to somebody if they wanted to, or just simply come in and have a cup of coffee. So we moved the wellness unit into police headquarters, and it has been there ever since. And it elevated the level of individuals who started feeling comfortable about asking for help or just having an opportunity for a quick debrief in tremendous ways for the police department. And it's been that way ever since. That office has more foot traffic, I think, than any other place in the police department right now.
Pretty risky because that almost goes against what most departments would do. Do you think it's because it's such a large department? Do you think this would work in a small department?
I think at the time we were so desperate. One of the things I failed to mention, right after we started the wellness unit formally, myself and a police sergeant that I picked to do it with me, before we had furniture, before we had phones, we had 5 officer deaths in 6 weeks. 2 were motor vehicle accidents, 2 were homicide, and 1 of them was a suicide. And so all of the negative attention through all of the ineffective coping that had been hitting the national news, people losing their jobs, add on to it the fact that we have now 5 officers who we've lost, who we dearly love. We learned and got really good at putting together our trauma services. They were always there, but they weren't necessarily efficient and immediate. And we learned real quickly how to start tending to our people. We had a very vulnerable population. That served in our favor. As sad as it is about all the things that happen to people, when you have a desperate population who needs to have some sense made out of things and they're vulnerable, that's when they learn how to start to be open to the things that they need. And so that helped tremendously. Having resources go out to people as opposed to having them necessarily come to us tremendously helped. And one other thing that we did early on is we did a needs assessment within the organization. We went to every lineup or briefing, whatever individuals call that at their agency, and we had a survey asking them what's getting in your way of being the best person you can be at work or at home. What can we help you with, if anything, to remove the interferences to your wellness? And we got about a 40% return on surveys. Doesn't happen.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
And it's because we sat there and we pushed for it and we encouraged them to create, to the extent that they could, what it was that we could put in place for them. And that made a huge difference. But we helped a lot of people define their own impediments and tried to get resources and training around those issues. And that showed our commitment to not assuming that we knew exactly what it was that people needed.
And I think that's case in point with almost anything, which is you need rank and file for the buy-in.
Absolutely.
And the buy-in isn't this campy, buy-in or whatever, buy-in bullshit. It's really, if you're going to use this and we're going to give you what you need to tell me what you need.
Yeah. And we also had a very robust advisory committee that consisted of a cross section of ranks, professional staff, sworn volunteers who worked for the department. By the way, 2,000 sworn, not 4,000 sworn. Correction from earlier.
All right, thank you.
Had a couple of psychiatrists who I had been working with on other research projects well before the wellness unit was even a thing. Sports medicine, chiropractor, union representation, because this was every bit an advantage to the union, if not more to the organization than people ever intended. Their call load after the wellness unit was put in place reduced by about 70%. from disgruntled employees.
Wow.
Because they knew there was a direct access to removing some impediments that were organizationally induced. And let's face it, police organizations are in place to serve the public first. We are an afterthought. So for anybody who might be listening who thinks my organization doesn't care about me, they do. Unfortunately, though, the vision is external. The vision needs to be turned internally. That's my hope for every police department, that we start doing a much better job at taking care, because officers aren't typically going to ask for help. So it has to be a proactive thing that leaders do in reaching out to the men and women that work for them. It can't be because something's gone wrong. It has to be so that something doesn't go wrong.
It's interesting because trying to get, so back east, in private practice, trying to make sure that every department has something in place in case of a critical incident or what have you. And, there's money, there's this, there's that. And you finally say to them, this is a liability issue.
Yes.
And so, what I'm hearing you say is just that, is that the primary, lack of better terms, is we need to cover our ass.
Right.
The secondary is the gain that comes out of it for every officer. And that's what needs to be almost reversed, is we need to do the right thing by the officer. And if we end up, with it should help liability, but whether it does or it doesn't, we need to be able to do that, because the truth is, if you do meet the needs of your officers, the liability, the stuff that you guys saw when you created the wellness, the officers, the at-risk behavior, the, all the other components of it, we should see the decrease anyway.
Right. And let me make it really clear here. We, management, I'm not there anymore, but I still consider myself involved in law enforcement leadership. We are the cause of most of the occupational stress. We just are. And it's not intentional.
Yeah, right.
It is the nature of this occupation. It is having to do more with less. It is the inability for police chiefs and sheriffs to say no when they should be about what services we provide. We are in our own way. And until we figure out how to serve internally better, we're going to continue to have issues. But with that said, to the extent that you can help people maneuver through that and understand that, that's at least doing something, as opposed to denying that it's there and assuming that the only resources are needed for the real, the trauma of being in an officer-involved shooting or any of those other things. That doesn't cause the big issues for the bulk of the people who end up leaving disgruntled, get hurt, get sick, or get fired because they couldn't cope. That's where the issues come from, is the inability to really tend to the day in and day out occupational stress that is inherent with this occupation.
Right. Most officers are not involved in shootings.
Absolutely not.
Statistically speaking. And yet there's this threshold that officers themselves judge themselves by.
Right.
Is, I'm not involved in a critical incident, so therefore it doesn't justify A, B, or C. And yet what we need to be able to do is to help educate that this is about cumulative stress, so that, I've been asked many times to, come on different shows at this point to talk about COVID, and the hotline, and whether or not we saw a significant increase in calls. And the truth is, COVID didn't cause the increase of calls. The riots caused the increase of calls because cops are used to dealing with the invisible enemy.
Right.
They're just not used to being the enemy.
Right.
So being able to understand that there needs to be a normalcy of place of being able to talk about what's going on. So now you've got officers. So this is what COVID did do. So now you've got officers that are working shift work, or they're on midnights. They're used to having the house to themselves to sleep when they go home. They've now got kids on Zoom doing school. They can't find a place. They can't, quiet an entire family. Spouses are now trying to help them, or the spouse says, I can't, you've got to help. You go on Zoom with little Joey. I'm going to take, Emily, and we need to divide and conquer because we've got, we've got to kind of manage this. So the stressors that we saw and continue to see are the increase in that cumulative component where we're just not getting them that help to be able to kind of diffuse that downtime. Right. So this becomes more of the cumulative stuff. If I go home after a shift, I'm not able to sleep like I used to be able to sleep. Right. I have to go back on a shift tonight. I mean, all of these different people, and I have to deal with, other people that are struggling with the same issues that I am. Right. So, trying to figure out how to make this normal, talking, being able to go to a peer support unit. And I think that's all of our drive. I think that's really kind of it. So how did you know and why that you wanted to be involved with Copline?
Because it was an extension of what I had been doing with people that I knew. I think I have a knack for it. I think I come to it with the perspective, not just of having grown up as a cop, but also being a manager and a leader in an organization. And I grew up with the same struggles that the men and women who call have and struggle with on a regular basis. I mean, it was kind of a no-brainer for me. That's where this is where you plug in next, because it was an opportunity to keep doing it, but on a different scale.
Except in the beginning where
there's you, of course. Then there's you, because truth be told, at that symposium, after my flying there on a red eye and being completely wiped out, you were the only nice person to me. I know that you can't believe that. That's how mean everybody else was to me, though.
That could only be the threshold that we can use, because I don't think I've ever been described as like the person that was really nice. But I also think that I was somewhat of feeling very much like a fish out of water.
So did I, though. That was the irony is, let's bring in people who deal with the population and who are trying to solve and may have best practices around, preventing police suicides, but let's shush them. Anyway, I'm not over it yet. I probably will be soon. And unfortunately, that's been my experience in really trying to give away some of the, I don't want to say best practices. Who knows if they're the best? They were the best practices for my population and where I work, but I find so many silos and so much empire building and ego about the right way to help people. The right way to help people is to simply lead with love and forgiveness. That's the right way. It's not about your ego. It's not about anything other than there's a hurting population that richly deserves to feel good and to feel well and appreciated.
I think so. I've had Beverly Anderson on. She was also part of that 2013 symposium, and then was part of another one that I did.
Was she nice to us? No,
Beverly wasn't in our group, actually. And Beverly, Beverly's it's so our type. But one of the things, by the time I asked her to join me, I think it was probably 2019 on another symposium, is she was just, she got a quote of me. She's like, I just get tired of just keep doing this for, she's been doing this for probably 40 years. She's like, we talk about the same stuff.
Yes.
I think that's what struck when I looked at that, and I thought 2013. And they're doing Breaking the Silence in 2013. I know. I'm thinking, how far have we come? And I do think the greatest impact has been Blue Help. And it's not about that Blue Help has been tracking the numbers of suicides. The fallout, the secondary gain of that organization has been talking about mental health.
Right.
That's what's kind of blown it open. Right. And you're right. I listen to people with all these egos and best practices, and that this one needs to be shushed and this one's doing better. And then I look at the suicide rates and I'm like, well, then we're all failures.
Yeah, but there is an answer to all of this. And it's a pretty easy, basic answer. And it is that today's leader, the 21st century leader, is the primary caregiver of every employee that works for them. If it was a perfect world, a perfect police department, perfect police culture, we wouldn't need wellness units. We wouldn't need a lot of peer support because the supervisor, the leader, would know. Every man and woman that works for them would know when something's amiss, would be blessed with empathy and compassion, not just blessed with, but expected to have it before the sheriff or the chief gives them a promotion. We have the answers, and the answer is simply human kindness and a change of priorities and the expectation that you don't promote in a police agency anymore unless you genuinely know how to take care of your people. And then the outliers, the serious traumas, somebody who really suffers from mental illness, they are the exception. And they get the best quality care, and they don't end up, committing suicide because we've aligned them with the best possible mental health care that we possibly can.
I love that. And I want to grow on that. And I want to make sure, just if you can see the light, and just make sure that you're well lit, because right now you are, but sometimes you get darker, but we're good.
Yeah.
Too beautiful. So, so what you said not only ruminates, but I truly feel is spot on. And what you're talking about is what one of my guys really has helped educate me on, the difference between leading and supervising. And it is where the military does better than law enforcement. Because when you have the military and you've got your leaders in the military, I understand there's suicide rates, but when you are in the military and you have a good leader, they know who's in their platoon, their battalions. They know them by name.
Right.
They know who's important in their families' lives. They know important dates. They keep track of all of those things. So when one of my guys was pissed off at his supervisor, because the supervisor said to him, you need to understand that I am the leader of this, unit. He's like, sir, you don't lead. He says, you are my supervisor. And he said, that is not correct. He said, no. He said, I will always follow your instructions because you are my supervisor. He said, but leaders know about the people that they are leading. He said, what are my kids' names? What's my wife's name? What day have I taken off every year for 24 years? Well, I have worn this gun badge and patch for you. One day, sir, one day. Mm-hmm. No idea. He's like, January 1st, it's my anniversary. He said, I would know that because he's a retired first sergeant, sergeant major. And that was really important to him.
Yeah.
And he's got such a marvelous reputation on his job that he himself has been able to impact more people by being able to say he is in counseling, because they look at him as this strong leader. And if he can get help. So what you're saying, what an incredible small piece, because it also prevents the fuck up, suck up, move up theory. Mm-hmm. It allows for a different type of mechanism. You can test, you can do all of those things, but now during an interview, what have you done for humanity?
Right. Yeah, it's not that hard.
It's not, but you know what it does? It takes the power out. It takes, if you want to get your buddy in, that's what's not going to happen. And that's exactly what needs not to happen, is that we need the best people with compassion. And I task the chiefs in my office far more than I task others. I certainly task my rank people, which is how many people have you shared that you're in counseling with?
Right. Yep.
What made mental health so important to you? You grew up with a mom who you share was mentally ill. What about your siblings?
Oh boy. They were victims of our upbringing, and my brother, bore a big responsibility. He's 4 years older. So during our childhood, he was really, we were welfare kids. And my brother, after high school, immediately got his real estate license. He wasn't ready to get out there and be a realtor. He took on a big brunt of the adult responsibility, the driving, the shopping, the everything, and it was too much for him. And he ended up being also the recipient of bad genes, the manic depressive issues, and he ended up he attempted suicide twice in his life, and the second time was a jump from a balcony from about 4 stories. He broke everything below his waist. A bout of depression had caused that for him, and he ended up being disabled. And since about, I guess it was 2003, I became sort of his primary caregiver. He couldn't bear the burden anymore. It was too much responsibility, and it caught up to him. So a tremendous amount of compassion for him, total lack of patience on my part. It was hard. I didn't do so well at it every day. It was really hard to see the cycle repeating itself, with my mom. So I did that make me more compassionate? Those are good questions. Those are good questions, but I've just always genuinely had a heart for people and been compassionate, and I feel way too much. That's a good thing. That's a bad thing.
Yeah. It's feeling, and I interviewed that peer support couple, and one of the things that they talk about, and that'll be on for next week, is the wounded healers. Is that everybody can give to everybody else, and that yes, you have resiliency, but have you processed out kind of what's made you resilient, and you are hard on yourself, with your brother. From the day that I met you and you chose to share, you're an amazing caretaker and caregiver. There's always of yourself that kind of seemed to be the last person on the list of who you're going to take care of. And I think that's really common in law enforcement.
Without a doubt, we get into this occupation with a skill set or a group of psychological dimensions that we are tested for that proves that that's who we are overwhelmingly. We're like one personality type in so many ways. And that gets exploited. And I don't mean that in a negative way. That's just a smart way to do business. But, here in California, 2 to 4 out of 100 people get a seat in the academy. And it's in large part based on the psychological dimensions that we're tested for to determine if we're going to be good at our job. And empathy has to be right up there. Let's face it, this occupation is all about giving others first. And we need people who are going to be able to do that under the best and the worst of circumstances. And so we're sought after as candidates to come into this occupation and put under the pressure to continually do that more than just about anybody else will. And we will do that at all costs.
Including up into paying with your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, it is not just line of duty paying with your life.
Correct.
It is truly not being able to continue.
Right.
Navigate your own hell. You aren't called out when things are going well.
Right. And then even sometimes when you are called out because they couldn't solve the problem, you're criticized for solving it with the only unfortunate way that it can be solved. And you're all over the news.
Yeah.
No win for a lot of people. No win.
So you have these wounded givers, wounded healers, and it doesn't help even after you retire. And this is something that I see. And one of the reasons why Copline was important to be able to open up those lines to retired people, not just have retired people answering those lines, is because in my private practice, what I see is decades of people that have just kind of shoved it all down. And I think one of the things that really has stuck with me was when one of my guys came on with this shoebox, came in. And it was sometime after he and I started seeing each other. And I'm like, what's in here? He says, my career. This holds my memories. And in there were all of these horrific scenes. And he said, I have never allowed myself to feel. Yeah. It's like I stuck it in the box and I said later. And he's like, later is now. And the general public just doesn't understand. You guys were not wired any differently. Everybody came out of a womb.
Yeah. Well, but you got to add to that the fact that a lot of cops don't know that's going to happen. There is this misconception with a lot of people getting ready to retire that they're going to wake up day one of being retired and be happy and energetic. Listen, folks, it is super exhausting. It will kick you in the butt when you retire because everything's going to catch up to you. And guess who you brought into retirement with you? The same unhappy, burnt out person that you were when you were working, unless you deliberately start incrementally changing who you are and who you're going to be in retirement. That doesn't get taught. This mattering need that we have when we're in law enforcement is prevalent and it's fed. The minute you leave and have nothing that you're going to plug into or no sense of who you're going to be, that gets compromised and challenged. And that is a really big issue, which is a good plug for Copline. So any of you retirees out there listening, it's a great way to plug in and continue mattering in a significant way. But anyway, that's just a shameless plug for Copline.
What was your worst day on the job?
Oof. That's a good question. No, that's a good question. I think it was a hurt by a coworker as opposed to a traumatic event that maybe we're kind of ready for. I mean, I certainly have lost men and women that I worked around. It was an intentional hurt from another coworker. Yes.
Your best day on the job?
Every other day. I loved what I did. And if I had not promoted and become an administrator and been put in a position to only be able to touch things superficially and feel like I was no longer making the difference, I would still be out there answering radio calls. I loved the job. I was so fed and fulfilled and reminded about everything that I should be thankful for on a daily basis. That job was outstanding for me. The administrative part was the hardest part. And that's where I needed to be, in a leadership position, developing programs, hopefully with staying power, the wellness unit. I needed to be there, but I loved doing the work. I loved doing the work. I love doing the work now that I'm continuing to do. What I hate is the stuff that gets in the way that keeps you from being able to do the work. And it's typically us. It's our own selves and our coworkers. And yeah, that's another story for another day. But every day was the best day with some pain and sadness and you know, and a lot of things strewn throughout. But in firing people, that was super hard. I mean, to tell somebody you have to go because you have a drinking problem and that's your second DUI, or you did XYZ because you couldn't manage to fix whatever was getting in your way to be at your best as an employee. That was hard. Those things were hard, but I loved what I did, and every day was the best day.
What difference did you make to the PD at the end? So you've been.
I'm going to say this because I say this to everybody else, and I deserve at least this. And for those of you who might currently be doing the job, this is for you too. You change the world every day for someone, directly or indirectly, and don't ever forget it. You have no idea the impact you have had on thousands of lives simply by the wisdom, decision, behavior, act of kindness that you have done for somebody. And we don't talk about that enough. If we could continually remind ourselves of why we got into the job and celebrate the small wins and successes and think about the people who called us because they were desperate and needed us and know that we made a difference, that sums up to changing the world every day. And that goes to everyone out there who is listening, whether you are retired and that was who you are and you're still doing things, or the officer, deputy, name any rank, professional support staff. You change the world every day. You need to know that. Somebody is always calling us, which is what results in us going out there and doing things. You're making a huge difference for those people. And even the ones who you send away to prison, you're helping them change and get a fresh start at some point. So that's hopefully that's what I did, because I extend at least that much to everyone else, and I truly believe that from my heart of hearts.
Why was the peer support unit so important to you? And was your vision what it ended up becoming?
Well, peer support was just one element of the greater wellness unit, because housed within that was chaplains, psychological services, of course, peer support, and, you know, a variety of other things. That has grown. I'm gone. That has grown. And I'm in touch with the men and women that work there on a regular basis, because they've become really good friends. And the things that they are doing are just incredible and selfless and making a difference on a regular basis. They have their hearts in the right place. And to see that the culture in San Diego PD has changed, it's incredible and remarkable. And I don't take credit for that. I give credit to the collective team of individuals who rotated through and gave their all during, you know, the period of time that they were working there, at the expense of their family time, at the expense of a whole bunch of things, including potentially promotion, because it wasn't necessarily the most glamorous position to be in or promote from. But I'm really proud of the men and women who I got to work with, who created something that has had staying power, that continually grows and flourishes, and it gets to be put out there as an example for others to follow. With that said, I will say this: if there's anybody out there that's considering developing something like that, one size doesn't fit all. I'm not suggesting San Diego is the best thing for anybody. There are some agencies where the resources that we had would never be available. But I'm really proud of the research we did, what was put in place, and what continually gets added on a regular basis.
I think one of the things that really impressed me was, and just make sure that I'm accurate in this, when we talk about licensed clinicians, that your officers and their families can access licensed clinicians every week, there's no limitation on how many times they can see them,
Correct.
and that it is paid for through the PD, not their private insurance, through a contract. Is that accurate?
Yes, and it could be about any issue. It doesn't have to be a work-related issue.
Right. I mean, so
And retirees also.
it's just, you talk about starting to shore up some of the failings, and that is so unique, Sarah. I don't know of any other agency that allows that, including for retirees.
Yeah.
That's not part of the wellness. So, I mean, I need for the viewers to understand that this is not part of you guys, that you have hired outside clinicians that work for an outside agency. So they're not coming in. They're not. This isn't San Diego Police Department's behavioral science unit. This is another agency that you guys have said take care of our men and women, their families, and after retirement.
Yeah, but in addition to that, and to further normalize using those doctors, they teach in continuing education courses with the wellness unit staff classes about catastrophic thinking, emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, resilience, a variety of different things, because I think it's really important to see them separate, but also connected with, again, that necessity for that language to be consistent is so important and gets lost in so many organizations. So yes, they are a distinct, separate entity, but also part of the greater picture of the wellness resources.
So it's the outside agencies, but they are kind of in the trenches from day one so that people can see them. Do they also teach in the academy classes? Yes. For recruits?
Not so much with the recruits, but they do get introduced to the recruits and their families the day after their graduation.
I remember that.
For the graduation ceremony, they're typically in town for the weekend. So that Saturday after the graduation, there is a full day with all of the wellness staff, including chaplains, the psychologists. The family comes in, has some alone time with everybody so they can ask the questions without their loved one in there. And they immediately get access to all the resources that their loved one cop gets. And they can call, they know they can call anyone in the wellness unit about their daughter, son, whoever, husband, wife, and say, hey, I'm concerned about so-and-so. And they can be assured that somebody from the unit will cold call without saying where it came from. They don't know if it was the supervisor, if it was a family member. And so it's an extended arm to family to make sure that their loved one is absolutely being looked after, cared for, and it can be done completely anonymously.
It's just, it is incredible. That piece is truly, I think, life-saving. How many officers have you had that have died by suicide past 5 years? Do you know?
I don't have that number handy. There have been a few. We at one point were the leading agency with a number of police suicides back in the 90s. That's gone down a little, but there have been some that are, well, they're all ridiculous, but yeah, there have been a few. And yeah, I just don't know the number.
So I can't imagine if these services weren't there, what kind of numbers we'd be looking at, because truly this is one of the key components to help us impact suicides, because we know that you don't go on Monday from being happy-go-lucky to Tuesday having a gun in your mouth.
Yeah.
So all these different stressors. So if there is a safe place that's provided that's outside the organization potentially, where you can talk about anything, you know, that face-to-face cop line theory. I mean, and we obviously are just active listeners on those lines, but having mental health professionals that have access from just a bad day to a full-blown crisis.
Yes, and at least two of them were law enforcement, retired, and then became psychologists. So that makes it even more suitable, because you have somebody who, not that a psychologist has to have done the work, they have to certainly be aware and familiar with it, but having two retired police lieutenants who now serve as psychologists is just, it's invaluable.
It really is. It really is. Is there anything that I did not cover today that you wanted to address, talk about, and kind of let our audience?
Yeah, just to any leaders out there, if the first question you're asking your employee is, do you feel like killing yourselves today? You have missed the mark. Fix that. Start talking, start connecting, start loving.
I think it's great. I think that is so true. And then to go on top of that, if you don't know how to do that as a leader, then get your ass into some type of counseling so that you can address your issues that are preventing you from actually being able to do that, because that is the crux. So if you can't take somebody there because you can't go there yourself, figure out how to do it.
Yes.
Yeah. So I always say you're either part of the problem or part of the solution. It is that black and white for me.
Yep. Agreed.
So thank you, Sarah. Thank you for spending your time. I know these are the least favorite things that you...
I hate being on camera. Thank you for sitting through the lighting issues. God bless you all. Thank you, Stephanie. You are my sister.
And you mine. And you truly are such a gift. I will always be grateful for the July 11th, 2013. And the fact that I obviously had an incredible day, that I was kind. So whatever intervened from above that allowed me to actually do that, even more spectacular. My kids probably will try and get in touch with you going, how'd that happen, really? Because we need to figure it out. So thank you. Thank you for that.